with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, holy cow, look at this headline. I can't believe it. Amazon will not build a new headquarters in New York City, a stunning reversal to an ambitious plan that would have brought an estimated 25,000 jobs to the city. It would have cost them almost $3 billion to build their headquarters. And isn't this some, wow, you got this kind of leftist company,
You're
with
levitating.
A leftist owner.
Neil Asbury is levitating in the studio.
Now look at this. And the guy who owns the Washington Post goes to New York City. They should be loving this guy, right? They should be loving this guy. And the crazies on the left up there kicked him out. They booted him out. They didn't like the tax incentives.
No, they feel it's wrong, it's unfair, it's immoral. Oh, no, I got confused. That's the wall. But they feel that it's wrong to take taxpayers' monies and create incentives for major corporations to go into a market.
And create jobs.
And what do they need 25,000 jobs in Queens for God's sake? They don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Have you been to Long Island City, man? They could definitely use the investment.
Just saying.
Yeah.
You know? So they made such a complaint about this that, Amazon and Jeff Bezos says, the heck with this. Just the heck. Listen, do you know how many cities, because you do know, this is a rhetorical question, because we've covered this, a lot of cities in this country would love to have 25,000 more jobs. South Florida was
Miami.
they finished in the final 3 or 4. Miami was a big market for him. Gave him access to global stuff really easy, lots of land to play with, and they don't have to shiver in the winter. That's a big deal for Jeff.
Hey, man, we're going to come back to that. I mean, that's a really big story, a very, very big story. But, Rich, just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the social media giants.
Yep.
And about the sort of control that they have. And, they become so huge in the databases, in the surveillance that they have on their customers and how they track you around and follow you around. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? I mean, what have we created here? What have we unleashed? Should it be regulated? Now, we don't like regulation, and we think the government has gotten involved in far too much regulation. But, these organizations have become very political, and the power and the control that they have, I just don't know. I'm thinking it's a big risk to our democracy, but that's me. We're very pleased to have with us right now Roger McNamee. I mean, this guy is amazing, a businessman, an investor, venture capitalist, a touring musician, and author of Zucked. Look at this, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. And Roger can write that book because he was there at the beginning of Facebook, a very important advisor.
That's pretty courageous in this day and age to do that.
And told him, hey, don't sell the company. Hold on, because, this is going to be very, very important, and you're going to make a lot more money by holding it. And boy, was he right. Hey, Roger, welcome to Made in America.
It's great to be on with you guys.
So tell us, what is going on with, not just Facebook, but, there's a lot of companies to be concerned about. Google and how they're advocating and, how they want to control our thoughts. What should we be worried about here?
Well, so, Neil, I think you nailed the basic issue. So these are great American companies who were incredibly smart at the beginning. They worked really hard. They had a clever idea, and they completely nailed it. For that, they got tremendous economic rewards. The challenge is the nature of the business itself. Because it's communications, they also were able to get political power. In every democracy in the world, they are the loudest voice or the dominant voice in the public square. And they're not elected. There's no accountability. And from that, if you will, there comes great responsibility. And the challenge is that none of the big Internet platforms have yet adjusted to having that responsibility and recognizing that they have a duty to protect the people who use their products from harm. And so we've started to see over the last 2 years harm showing up in a lot of different places. And I'll give you a nice, simple example. I think one we can all agree on, which is kids, right? There's a lot of issues. Tiny little kids being exposed to age-inappropriate videos on YouTube, and teenagers being bullied on Instagram, or having a fear of missing out on Instagram or Spotify, or Instagram or Snapchat. And then you've got adults who are affected in various ways from the way that these platforms manage what you see and prevent you from getting a complete picture of the world around you. And so you get a bunch of this stuff going on over time, and we have to ask the question, should there be some limits? For example, why is it legal to collect data about minors, about kids? We've really never had that discussion. Nobody ever said no, but now that we've seen the consequences, maybe we want to have that conversation. And why is it that companies that collect, your credit card information are allowed to sell it to other people? Is that a good idea? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but let's have that conversation. My point here is we now know things we didn't know about these products that we love. I love Facebook. I recognize how useful Google is, not just the search engine, but the Google Docs and all these other things. But there's a much higher cost to these products than we realized. And now that we know, it's really important to have that conversation and figure out where the limits ought to be, because this isn't about, having big bureaucracies regulate them. Some of this is just like questions of right or wrong. It's not left versus right. It's really right versus wrong. And we are all entitled to be individuals and to live our lives happily. And these products could do that if they had just a little bit more care in what they were doing and the way they were doing it.
Well, I find it interesting. Roger, first of all, I really enjoyed, I actually watched you a few weeks ago one morning on Fox and Friends, and I was enthralled with what you were saying. Because I was a vice president level of a Fortune 25. It was Blockbuster.
Yeah.
And in those days, you're talking about large corporations that had the ability to have psychometrics of people. And we did. And we knew every Friday or Saturday what people were purchasing in terms of their films. Now, that tells you something about people. So you see patterns. And we had all that data. But, we were not allowed at that time. It was very, very bad to go out and use that data to sell it to another third-party omniscient to get information to go ahead and market to the folks based upon things that they're going to have an interest in, because they've demonstrated that for the last 7 months, every Friday, every Saturday, 2 and 3 times with different videos. Now, what concerns me, and I think you're 100% correct, it's the unintended consequence of what's happening with these large corporations. That being, they can control thought, but guess what? The unintended consequence is that a large plurality, Roger, and you know this, now get their news and information and thought patterns from social media. That's what happened in the last campaign and the campaign before that with Obama. And so much so that they had experts advising the campaigns on how to do it. And don't you find that to be, Google said don't be evil, but that's pretty dangerous.
You've put your finger exactly on the issue, which is the world that we all grew up in was a world where people gathered data from their customers in order to improve the service or the product that they sold to those exact customers. The problem that we have today is that people collect data now. They do surveillance, right? They have products like Amazon Alexa or Google Home, which are all over your house now and listening all the time. And they're collecting that data not to improve those products, but rather to create new products that you might not even get any benefit from. And it is this notion that there is a social value to our data, that if you collect enough data about enough people, you can tell things about everyone. And, for example, you don't need to be a user of Google. You don't need to be a user of Facebook. You don't need to be a user of Instagram, because it's possible to buy enough data from credit card issuers, from your cell or your phone company, and other sources of data, so that these companies are able to get a surprisingly complete picture of all of us, even if we're not using their products. And my basic notion here is that doesn't feel American to me. Okay, I come from the sort of, I lived in New Hampshire for a long time, right? They used to say, live free or die. And there's something not free about a world where corporations are allowed to sort of get inside our heads because they have this massive technology platform, and we go on there to, say, share family photos or find out about an event we want to go to. And they're sitting there trying to manipulate our attention so that we'll spend more time on the site. They send us notifications, they give us likes, all this kind of stuff. At the same time, they're appealing to things that we can't resist, things that provoke fear, things that provoke outrage. And they do that not because they're bad people, but they do it because that's really good for causing us to share stuff and spend more time on the site, and that's good for their business. And so my attitude is the American way of doing business is to look at your customers as a partner and to respect them and treat them fairly. And, I think most business people do that. They recognize that there's a collaboration among companies, their suppliers, and their customers and the communities that they live in. And in some ways, the country has lost sight of that, that we're kind of big companies have power over little companies, and they use it without ever thinking about what that means long term. And I would like us to kind of get back to a form of capitalism where we all recognize that, we only got one life to live. Let's enjoy each other, right? Let's kind of spend more time face to face with people, and we can build the economy, we can build the country, we can build our businesses more successfully by being part of, something where we treat each other with respect.
Hey, Roger, let's hold it for the air. Do you have a moment to come back to us here?
Sure.
Just for a few more minutes?
Yep.
Hey, we've been listening to Roger McNamee, incredible, the author of Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe, a very, very important topic for our economy, for our country, for our society. You don't want to miss this. Roger's going to be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, a very fascinating topic. Roger has got this thing nailed. Roger McNamee, a businessman, investor, venture capitalist, was there at the very early stages of Facebook, a very important advisor, also a touring musician and author of Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. And we're talking about surveillance capitalism. It's something that we got to talk about. We're going to hear a lot more about it. So, Roger, my question is this. Back during the last political, the presidential election, there was a lot that came out, after that election. And what we found out that the social media giants were very much, on the Democrat side. That's not surprising. But they were using these platforms in an unintended way to try to undermine a political party. Now, whether you agree or disagree, things should be fair. You talk about the American way, the American life, American culture. People want it to be fair. We want it to be fair, and we don't want it to be malicious. We don't want it to be devious. We don't want our political system to be undermined by, sort of people in the back room, pushing buttons and controlling things and not coming out front and telling us who they are and what they're doing. And I think there's something just very sinister about that. And as you say, so much thought in our country is formed around social media and what gets exposed and what doesn't get exposed. So if you have a group of people with a political ideology and totally, hook, line, and sinker, in that ideology, in the means justify the end, that no matter how they win, and whether it's in this sort of sinister sort of way or a fair way, it doesn't really matter as long as we win. It just seems to me that our whole democracy could be undermined if we're not careful here. What do you say?
So Neil, this is the real challenge of all this, is the platforms aren't that we're talking about here, and this is going to be Instagram, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter. In a sense, the politics of the people who run them, right, wound up not being the issue one way or another, because the nature of the platforms is that anybody can manipulate people using them. Because the way it works is their business is about getting you to develop a habit, and for some people that becomes an addiction. And when you're addicted, you're easily manipulated. And the way those advertising tools work, literally anybody can do it. So what we learned in 2012, what we learned in 2016, is that these tools are so powerful for influencing people in an election context because they have this thing they call micro-targeting. And micro-targeting, essentially, you know so much about each person that instead of having to sell an idea like economic growth, you sit there and you find out the thing that really bothers people. Each one, it can be totally different. You know, you may be very worried about shelter pets. I may be worried about, you know, the price of gasoline. It doesn't matter what it is. You can use those things to scare people and to tell them misleading things about the other candidate. And we're already seeing other countries, right? Before, you know, you had Russia in 2016, but now we've already had Iran, we've had China, we've had other people playing in it. But, you know, it's not just foreigners. Anybody, any corporation, any individual with a little bit of a budget can do this. I mean, we saw it in a little, like, school board election in California where massive disinformation campaign in a school board election, right? It's insane. I mean, elections should be about real issues. And, you know, this is America. We should recognize we have so much more in common than we have that separates us, and that we can find the common ground. But if it's economically attractive to people, right, if you have businesses where polarization enhances their business, that's going to be tough, right? And that's the sort of thing we're dealing with here. And I look at this and go, you know, this is a country with lots of different viewpoints. And all I want to do is to just make sure that people recognize that at the end of the day, if we want the economy to grow, if we want everybody to be happy, we got to find some common ground. We got to agree about, you know, we got to have highways that work. We got to have airports that work. We got to have, you know, schools that work. All the things that are necessary, you know, police departments, fire departments, all these different things that we share. And, you know, make those things operate properly. And you can't do that if you can't talk about the real issues, right?
Well, you know, and that, I think it's a very, very good point. But what does concern me, for example, is I want to get back to the point, don't be evil, with Google. And when they ultimately did testify, which I found to be, you know, kabuki theater and for Congress. But, you know, when you do research on Google, and let's say you pump in Trump, you want to get the latest, you know, stories, information about Trump. Well, what are going to be the first 7, 8, 9, 10 different media that's going to pop up that you're going to find secondary information about? It's going to be New York Times, LA Times, Boston Globe. It's going to be Huffington Post. It's going to be Washington Post. It's going to be the Atlantic. It's going to be all these, you know, far to the left institutions that certainly have a mindset as to what they're going to say about, you know, the president, or for that time, the candidate. So what bothers me, and when they discuss it, they say, well, it's all in the algorithm. We have to figure this out because the algorithm is forcing us to do the way it's going. We don't do that, but the algorithm does. The algorithm being the 800-pound gorilla in the room that no one seems to know how to maintain. So it does worry me that the research platform for people to get the information, to understand what they want to do, so they can have a good dialogue, a good communication, and connecting the dots with those that don't agree with them so they can find a happy hunting ground there, is really, to a degree, somewhat tainted from the start when you're trying to do your research. Well, and that does worry me a lot.
And you should be worried about that, right? We should not allow any corporation to get between us and the facts, right? Part of this problem is it's so convenient to let these technology platforms do the work for us. And it's so easy to forget that there's a cost to that we aren't, you know, it's not in dollars and cents. It's in other places, but it's still a very high cost. And so, interestingly enough, Apple's made a real effort to get away from that model entirely, right? So their Apple News is based on, you know, you pick the places that you want to read, right? And that's what your thing is. They're not sitting there trying to guess on that stuff. You just pick what you want. But you can go to the sites that you like. And I think that's what I tell people. Don't let the big platforms aggregate your life. You know, if you want to send photos to families, use your email, right? If you want to organize an event, use texting or email to do that. And I mean, the place where you and I totally are worried about exactly the same thing is this issue of letting a small number of corporations control the public square. I mean, that's terrifying to me. And in my mind, it's not, again, that these are bad people. It's that their economic incentives are not aligned with the interests of the people who use the platforms. And that is
hey, Roger,
a big problem.
Very, very fascinating. However, where we may have a little bit of a disagreement is that the political views of those few people that you're mentioning do get into how they let the algorithms work and what people see and what they don't see.
Well, here's the thing I will tell you. Interestingly enough, and this is the thing I've studied really closely, the math is what drives that, okay? It's the way of pissing people off. It's the way of making, provoking outrage, provoking fear is what it's all about. So if they know that by showing that stuff to you is going to make you angry or to make you afraid, that's what they're going to show you. So weirdly enough, it looks like it's their political bias, but it's totally their economic bias. But it produces the same thing, right? The point is, it doesn't matter what the cause is, it's still wrong, okay?
Yeah. Hey, Roger, I mean, this is fascinating. I mean, we're going to follow this for a long time.
And as I would say to your listeners, we have much more power here than we realize. We have the ability to change our behavior, and we have the ability to influence politicians to do the right thing. And so let's do this together, okay? It's going to be a long walk, but we can start now and do this together, and it'll be fun while we do it.
Hey, Roger, thanks. Roger McNamee, the author of Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. Roger, you've been a wonderful guest. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on. Take care, everybody.
Coming on, we have Daniel DiSalvo from the Manhattan Institute. And hey, Rich, we're going to check in with the Janus decision. Remember that Supreme Court decision?
Absolutely.
That made it that non-union members did not have to pay fees to public unions to have a job? Well, let's get an update on that, and let's see what's happened. You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, Roger McNamee, what a guy. I mean, fantastic. And this whole thing of surveillance capitalism. And
this is something we're going to keep talking about because it's bigger and more scary than most people understand.
Yeah, what do you? And
profitable.
Our democracy, our economy. Just so much is wrapped into this. We followed the Supreme Court and its rulings on unions and what was going on there. And a very, very important ruling came out not long ago, the Janus ruling, which said that non-union employees did not have to pay fees to state unions in order to have them bargain on their behalf. I mean, if you didn't want to be part of a union, you didn't have to be part of a union. But the states were requiring you to pay to the union despite you not wanting to be part of the union. Now, what was wrong with that is we all know that these state unions are very political. And they have their own social ideas of what should be done, in our society. So they basically take your money, which, you don't want to give them. You're compelled. If you want to have a job, you got to give them your money. And then they take your money and they give it to political activism that you object to. I mean, it just doesn't seem right.
The basis for the lawsuit.
Right. And the Supreme Court said you can't make them do that. Hey, but the unions and their Democrat friends didn't roll over. And there's a lot of states, obviously, that are very blue. And they've now enacted laws to still make it very difficult for people to leave unions or not pay the unions, though you may object to them, and you have a right to do so. Very fascinating here. We're going to get an update on Janus and see where this has actually ended up and this battle is still going on. We have Dan DiSalvo from the Manhattan Institute. Dan, welcome to Made in America. So what do you make of this whole Janus decision? Hey, look, Rich and I mean, we were doing cartwheels in the hallway when that came out. We were very pleased with that decision. Very important decision. And but the states are fighting back. I mean, the unions did not roll over here. And not as many people left the unions or are not paying the unions as we thought would have happened. And there's now new state laws and executive orders and other court decisions that are making it harder for the unions not to receive their money. So what's going on?
That's right. In some ways, contrary to the predictions of both the left and the right, a lot less in some ways changed when it came to public sector unions and state and local government. Many people thought that this decision would be a fatal blow or devastate public employee unions, and the reality is they were starting from a position of strength, and they really haven't lost much ground, in part because they've had a lot of assistance from state legislatures and governors in states where public employee unions are strong that have enacted in 2018, and there's lots of new bills being considered in this legislative session that basically incentivize and help public employees unions recruit and retain their members. So the result is that public union membership hasn't really fallen very much.
So this is, when this ruling came down, I mean, this is a very important ruling. I mean, I thought it helped with the demise of Scalia, because we know where Scalia would have come down on this prior to his departure. But this really affected, or could have affected dramatically, the funds coming into the unions, membership in the unions. I do find it intriguing, and I'm glad you're on the show, Daniel, to talk about this. Connect the dots. And who's really maintaining the control on this? Because somebody, is it the lobbyists? Is it the unions themselves? Is it the corporations? Who is really maintaining this barrier? We're talking about walls right now being immoral. Who's maintaining this wall? Not letting people get out of the union and even though they're not getting as much money, maintaining the union. So where is all that energy coming from?
Well, in many cases, it's coming from the unions themselves. The truth is the case did mean that anyone who was represented by a union but was not a member, the union had to cease and desist from charging them what were called agency fees. And that has happened, and the unions have lost a significant chunk of revenue as a result of that. But in order to stave off any further losses, meaning people who are union members who might now consider saying, hey, before I really, what difference did it make if I was a union member or not? Because ultimately I have to pay regardless. Now I have an actual choice. To prevent people from exercising that choice, some states, say New Jersey, for example, have passed laws that restrict the amount of time at which a person can opt out of the union membership to basically a 10-day window tied to the date of their hire or the date they signed the union card. And it's these kind of laws that make it trickier, create another barrier to getting out. Other laws in New York and Rhode Island suggest that certain services, like in New York, life insurance, for example, that was people could get to the union, can now be exclusively reserved for union members, which then gives a new incentive for people to either remain in the union or for people to join. So it's all these subtle measures that have helped keep the membership numbers high, and when members are higher, that ultimately translates into more dues revenue and in turn more money for political activity.
So, what is the next move at the courts? I mean, let's talk about the Supreme Court. Are there any other? Is there anything on the docket in this next session at the Supreme Court that's going to deal with unions?
There's been a couple of cases. One, you could say, coming from the conservative side, that's challenging. That's been petitioned to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court hasn't accepted it yet. That would affect public sector labor relations. It's challenging the idea of what's called exclusive representation. Once a union basically is established in a bargaining unit, that means the union alone can negotiate with management over whatever subjects are specified under state law, usually the salary, benefits, and working conditions. If, however, this challenge to the constitutionality of exclusive representation were to go to the court and the court were to decide in favor of the petitioners, that could mean that individual employees or groups of employees could negotiate on their own behalf.
Interesting. Hey, Dan, I mean, this is a very important topic for our country. Very, very important. I mean, you talk about the corruption of politics. I mean, right here it is. It's unions and the way they collect their money and how they funnel it back to the political system. Very, very important that we stay on top of this. Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Coming
up, we have Jeff Ferry from the Coalition for Prosperous America. He's the chief economist. And he's going to talk about the tariffs, specifically President Trump's China tariffs. Are they working or are they not working? You don't want to miss it. You're going to hear about it right here at Made in America.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Rich, I mean, it just goes to show how powerful these unions are. You know, there's a huge decision at the Supreme Court about how they fund themselves. But the states to where they are so deeply ingrained, because of the politicians who are so deeply addicted to the corruption and the money that comes from the unions, and specifically here, the public unions, to back to them, and then, you know, going out and enacting laws that'll make sure that that money stays with the unions and therefore stays with their political party.
Yeah, it is such a corrupt swamp to deal through, and I got to tell you something else. I mean, I'm serious about it. It's a very dangerous scenario to have to fight for because it represents a lot of money. We're talking a lot of money, and we're talking a lot of power, and you're talking corporatism. And corporatism mingling with the public sector in somehow, you know, merging together could be a very powerful, violent group of people. And they don't want to give that up. That's why Janus is so important.
So important.
So important.
Wow, this is a hell of a show here today, man. We
live in very colorful, exciting times, that's for sure.
Wow.
No lack of discussion.
But let's talk about the tariffs.
Love it.
The tariffs. Global trade. Global trade. We got to fit that in here today. So important. We got with us right now Jeff Ferry, the chief economist at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Jeff, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks very much, Neil. Good afternoon to you.
So, you know, are the tariffs working? Are they not working? But will it be irrelevant? Because is there a deal that's imminent here? So where would you like to start? Are they working, not working? And what kind of deal might we expect from President Trump and President Xi? Because it looks like they're kind of moving in that direction.
They might be moving in that direction. You're right. Let's start by talking about what the tariffs have achieved in the roughly 12 months they've been around. I think they've achieved quite a bit. We've seen a boom in steel production and investment. We've seen probably 8 or 10 major steel expansion operations going on everywhere from Florida to out west and up to Illinois. In solar panels, we've seen about 13 companies say they're going to launch brand new or expand existing solar manufacturing facilities, and they're employing, well over 1,000 people, probably over a couple of thousand people by the time they're fully up to speed on those facilities. So I think what you see across the economy is all the sectors where we've enacted tariffs, the domestic economy has reacted and manufacturing has sprung back to life. Furthermore, by enacting tariffs against half of China's imports, you've seen, I think it'd be fair to call it a stampede of multinationals saying we need to get some of our production out of China, not all of it, not yet, but some of it, and we need to be firmly implanted in places, mostly in Southeast Asia, where they're opening second production facilities, or if they already had them, expanding them dramatically, and that's hurting the Chinese economy, which is why President Xi is in the mood to make compromises. So I think
it seemed,
the tariffs are working.
I agree with what you're saying. This is Rich Rothman. I totally agree with what you're saying. And I've been following this with Neil, and we've been debating it quite a bit. See, I'm in favor. I believe that there's a purpose for the tariffs, and I really applaud this president for taking a stand in what he's doing. I also think he's doing it at the right time, because if we really understand the economy of China for the last few years, as opposed to a number of years ago, they were growing by 30%, 40% a year, 28% a year. They really are having a serious problem right now. And when I listen to folks like Gordon Chang and others, they're even advocating don't drop the tariffs yet, maintain those tariffs, because that's a tremendous leverage for us right now. So I think that is the direction that we should be moving in. You agree?
Yes, I agree 100%. I think that, the Chinese economy growth for the last 20 years has been off the American consumer. We're the only country, frankly, dumb enough to allow them to take away such a huge portion of our manufacturing capacity. And when we slap tariff on them or take other measures, they feel that, because we're such a large portion of the economic growth they've enjoyed for the last 20 years. So we have a lot of
Jeff, let me take a little bit of a different view. I'm an American manufacturer, and I have 5 plants here in the United States. Now, I don't know who designed these tariffs. I really don't. I mean, they don't distinguish between finished goods, raw materials, components, and so forth. About half of what we import from China goes into American manufactured goods, including my goods. Now, you go and you put tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25%. Now, there's a lot of products that we import from China that until today have zero tariffs, like hot products, like ranges and cooking equipments and all of that. They're zero tariff coming into the United States, right? So people can bring finished goods into the United States with Chinese steel and aluminum, the cheapest in the world, and they can bring it in duty-free, whereas myself, as an American manufacturer, brings in steel and aluminum, and I got to pay 25%. I got the highest steel cost in the world, and we're bringing in finished goods at zero duty that I have to pay all these tariffs on my components and raw materials to make product to sell in this country. I mean, that doesn't sound very smart to me.
I think that's a very good point. And our view at the Coalition for Prosperous America has been right from the start, you've got to look at the entire supply chain, and you've got to put tariffs on downstream products. And in fact, we have members we have a friend I talked to who makes hand tools, uses steel, and whether he uses imported steel or American steel doesn't matter. You're right that last summer the price of steel went up pretty dramatically. It's come back down, by the way. But the point was he was hurting because of that, and he was worried about increased Chinese competition. Now, then the Department of Commerce said we're going to put out a list of what we're going to tariff from China, and hand tools were on that list. So that protected him and has helped him in his retail sales in places like Home Depot. So cooking ranges are something I see whenever I go to Home Depot. You're right; they've got a lot of steel in them, and we should think about whether we need to protect that. I mean, the core of the problem is that China enjoys hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidy from their government to produce the world's dirtiest steel, and they now produce 51% of the world market. That has to be stopped and reversed, because we cannot allow ourselves to be dependent on China for steel, aluminum, and all the downstream products that flow from that. So, it's China that started this trade war 20 years ago when it chose this policy of industrializing at the expense of every other country in the world, and especially the American consumer. So we need to adopt the right policies. Now, by the way, tariffs are one policy. A policy that does a lot of that work for us would be to reduce the value of the dollar to a much more competitive level. I mean, we have a study out this morning that says the dollar was reduced by 27%. This would stimulate U.S. industrial production such that you would see 6 million additional jobs after 6 years. So just think about that. That's another way to attack this problem. The reality is China initiated this problem. Other countries participate in the same export surplus at the expense of America. Our trade deficit has been eroding our manufacturing capability, and we need to take action. And if you say to me, well, has the Trump administration done enough? I'd say, no, they haven't done enough. We still don't see enough production starting up in this country, but they're on the right road.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for being on the show. Very, very, very wise, very insightful. Jeff Ferry, Chief Economist at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. I vote for that at Prosperous America. I love it. Jeff, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, man, this show has just flew by, man. Wonderful, wonderful
great
show.
Guest. We had good guests today. Phil did a great job.
He did a great job.
Great
I really enjoyed it. I mean, the topics that we're having and covering and the people that's coming on our show, my goodness, great stuff. But we're going to end where we started. We're going to go right back to New York City. What in the world are they thinking of up there? I mean, look, you got de Blasio. You can't call him some right-wing capitalist. You got Governor Cuomo. I mean, look at this guy. This guy, he's crazy, man.
But Cuomo's upset. Cuomo was upset.
That's what I'm telling you.
This is insane. They're all on the same side. What happened?
That's what I'm telling you.
This is nuts.
How could we, kind of look, and see things the same way that Governor Cuomo sees or de Blasio? I mean, these guys, I agree with like none of the time. And here, they see this thing that's happened with the left-wing crazies. I mean, they would have to be saying right now, what in the world is happening with our party? And by the way, if Amazon pulled out of New York City, and what does that mean for 2020? I mean, what does that mean for the state of the Democrat Party? For taking this iconic company about to pump in billions and billions of dollars, jobs. And I'm talking about the very high-paying type of jobs, going along with the $15 minimum wage, $20 or whatever you want to make it in New York. We'll buy into that too. And then getting kicked out before they had the first shovel of dirt, to build the first piling.
You have to sit back and you watch this unfolding. I just
they're
watched
destroying themselves.
Neil, it's exactly right. Whereas a couple of months ago, I said, the Democrats are going to roar back. They took back 43 seats. They're going to do this. They're going after Trump. They're pushing for this. They're having more investigations. They're fighting him on the wall between the United States and Mexico. And they were in such a strong position for themselves. And then all of a sudden, the inauguration was, they got inaugurated. The new people came in and they're out there talking. And everything's starting to unwind with these. Cory Booker. Spartacus. And the statements he's making are equally insane. Which, by the way, when we have time, maybe next week, I want to discuss the real Cory Booker, and I'll reference where it comes from on neutral standards. Why he became Spartacus, because he thinks he's Superman. But that's another whole story. But what's interesting here, a poll came out from the Trust Barometer group. It's called Trust Barometer poll that said the majority of California residents, 53% of them, want to leave California. Those are probably the conservatives. Want to leave California. What do you think the people are going to say in New York State right now? Think for a minute. Downstream from this, Amazon says, you know what? This is nuts. These people are crazy. So we're gonna have to go find someplace else, and we have all the homework done already, so you can probably make a pretty good decision on that. But what does it say about other large corporations that want to move in? Neil, there has to be a reason for large corporations to come to a state. You have to sell the state. You have to make it attractive. You have to do wonderful things. In some of the southern states, like South Carolina and others, Tennessee, it's a right-to-work state. That's a pretty cool idea. New York is not.
Oh, never will be.
It's a union state, never will be. It's deep blue. So here you have a governor that's totally confused what his morals are anyway, because he's saying, we can have, abortion post-birth. Oh my God, I thought that was called murder. That's in the Ten Commandments. I don't think you're supposed to do that. And then, but he said, well, wait a minute, we want to really get these large corporations here, but I really don't like the large corporations because they're making too much money. We want to go after the billionaires, which the other Democrats want to do. Let's tax them 70%, 90%. Oh, hell, let's just take it all. Take 100%. Why not? Let's just go for it, babe. We're going to do this. And you're going to start, we already know that people are leaving New York and New Jersey to get to places like Florida in the summer in the South and some other states. I think if this really happens, which apparently it is, I think New York's in big trouble.
Well, you have 57% of New Yorkers who want Amazon to be there.
Well, they're going to get their. They can go over and get their socks the same day.
You got 25% who says that they don't want Amazon to be there. My point is this: is that you still have a small part of the Democrat Socialist Party of America that that's really advocating, but they have a very loud voice. They have a very big stick, and they're a force. They're a force in the Democrat Party. And they're going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. But not even the people in New York can subscribe to these policies and the craziness. So what's going to happen when this small minority within the Democrat Party hijacks the party, which we now see it happening, and go into the 2020 election, with their voice and their policies on display? Now we got to go, Rich.
It's called one word: disarray.
Ooh,
that's
disarray.
all I'm going to say.
And that is
disarray.
That is the word of today. Disarray. Rich, we're out of time. But don't worry, Rich. I see a little tear coming down. We're going to be back
it is sad.
Again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.